So it's safe to say the Lord of the Rings trilogy was a game changer.
But there's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo. And it's worth fighting for. I haven't cried like that since Titanic.
And it really influenced my love for films back when it released in 2001. And I only grew to appreciate it more and more over the years, because I got old enough to comprehend a good script, special effects, and character development. With all the franchises that have come and gone over the years, this franchise is one with an amazing retention rate with its fans. I think if you ask most people, given they are fans of different genres including fantasy, they would probably say the best trilogy of all time is either the first Star Wars trilogy or The Lord of the Rings. And in my opinion, The Lord of the Rings is the best trilogy of all time. Whereas Star Wars was also a big part of my childhood and had a very expansive universe, the first 3 movies do have some inconsistencies and faults here and there, like Princess Leia talking like this.
Governor talking. I should have expected to find you holding Vader's leash. I recognized your foul stench when I was brought on board.
And spending a little too much of a plot on Ewoks fighting against trained stormtroopers with sticks and rocks. And yes, I understand that Star Wars was essentially meant for all age groups, and it was beyond revolutionary back then, but its writing isn't quite up to par with Lord of the Rings. However, I will say the writing for Yoda was great, especially for a character that people didn't really take serious at first glance. He was very philosophical and influential over Luke, like a Jedi Master would be.
Alright, I'll give it a try.
No. Try not. Do. Or do not. There is no try.
And I think too that Darth Vader is probably the best villain of all time in cinema. It seems over the last 15 years though that the industry has really struggled in recapturing the magic of a fantasy universe, or succeeding in book adaptation films. I often think to myself, what if Lord of the Rings came out today? Let's say The Fellowship of the Ring came out in 2018, Two Towers last year, and Return of the King this year. What would be different about how the property is seen, and how much influence would it have over pop culture? Let's pretend too that the industry would be running like it normally is, without the current interruptions we have going on. And let's pretend the Hobbit movies didn't come out either, which probably isn't hard for a lot of you.
I know how I feel. I'm not afraid. You make me feel alive.
It's the big day, yeah.
Tell you. I'm proud in me.
I don't know what that means.
This trilogy would still be the first time Middle-earth came to the cinema. Also, let's say the only thing different about The Lord of the Rings coming out today would be the more modern special effects of today and maybe some combat choreography, but everything else is the same. I think the first thing people would appreciate about the Lord of the Rings universe if it came out today would be the world building and lore the movie set up right from the get-go.
Much that once was is lost, for none now live who remember it.
In the extended version of The Fellowship, Galadriel's eloquent voice gives an exciting introduction about the different rings, the battle against Sauron, and the history of the One Ring ending up in the Shire. But even without that intro, the peaceful and calm setting of the Shire and the unveiling of the ring's danger by Gandalf shows that there's plenty of conflict and hostility beyond the bubble of the Shire. And as the films progress, there's many subplots and references of different stories that happened over the years, which gives the audience a better sense of the stakes at hand for the battle of good versus evil, and the conflict many of the characters face throughout their journey. People today would definitely appreciate all the different layers these films add to the lore of Middle-earth, even for someone like myself who didn't read the books before seeing the movie. When looking at these stories on a deeper level, we see that they're more about friendship, courage, and never giving up, more than they are about magic, wizards, and orcs. And like I mentioned earlier, that's just something I saw in films more as I got older and matured. If you think The Lord of the Rings killed the competition back in its heyday, and oh my god, it mopped the floor at the 2004 Oscars in every single category it was nominated in, I believe the same thing would happen today, and even more so. I've noticed a lack of loyalty to source material in recent years. Big properties and franchises with lots of hype historically just falling flat without really creating a long-lasting influence on its audience. Peter Jackson didn't cut any corners in making The Lord of the Rings come to life. And just like how many people praised Lucas in creating the first Star Wars movies, Peter Jackson also had to get extra creative with the technology he had at the time, which ended up making the movie more believable and engaging. For example, the orcs in the movie. Many were tremendous villains that added a great layer to the menacing evil side our heroes were facing, and none of them were composed of CGI.
What?
What?
Huh? What?
What did you say?
Along with the very well done costumes, armor, and weapons, and the practical effects that nowadays fans beg for filmmakers to use. In the wide shots and epic battle scenes where CGI was used, it didn't take me out of the experience of the battle still. Even Gollum looked very real up close, and looked even better in The Hobbit. Whereas sadly in the same movie, the orcs don't look nearly as believable or present with their CGI. I did not read the Lord of the Rings books, partly because I love the movie so much and only wanted to see the story in that light. But I was also in 4th grade when The Fellowship came out, and I saw how long the books were and just decided I'd rather just wait for the movies. I did read The Hobbit though after seeing The Fellowship because I wanted to learn what happened before the trilogy started. But I have seen many videos and articles talking about the differences the Lord of the Rings movies had from the books and what Peter Jackson had to change. And I saw that pretty much every decision he made really made sense. There's only so much that can be portrayed in a movie while keeping the story moving forward cohesively. Not to mention, just because something sounds great in a book doesn't mean it'll translate well in the big screen. Now, with our hypothetical Lord of the Rings movies coming out these last 3 years, and how their epic stories would still be told with top-notch acting, writing, and characters, let's talk about how it would do at the box office. Now, unlike some trilogies, the Lord of the Rings films made more money each year they came out, not less. Also more impressive is how they made each movie with roughly the same budget. This is probably in part that Peter Jackson and his crew boldly shot all the movies consecutively from October of 1999 to December of 2000, with some pickups and reshoots here and there later on that lasted 6 weeks for each movie. But for a trilogy with about 12 hours of runtime with their extended editions, that's not too bad.
No, it isn't.
So here are the worldwide numbers for each film. Fellowship made $887.8 million, Two Towers $951.2 million, and Return of the King $1.14 billion, totaling to almost $3 billion. That's a lot of money, right? Now let's make a small but somewhat relatable comparison. George Lucas sold Star Wars to Disney for $4.05 billion, but let's not forget that that franchise was going for 35 years before he sold it in 2012. Now let's measure the movie budgets to box office profit for The Lord of the Rings. The budget for the whole trilogy was $281 million and made $2.981 billion in box office revenue, resulting in $2.7 billion in overall profit. That's a profit of 960%. Something any studio would die to have for any single movie, let alone an entire trilogy. Not to mention the additional money made from the movie's DVD and Blu-ray sales, and especially the extended versions.
They said, what happened to Saruman? Buy the extended DVD.
I remember buying the extended version for The Return of the King and seeing all the discs and extra content it came with, and I binge watched all of it in the same day. There was just something special back then about getting physical things like DVDs. The movie box had a cool design, and seeing new scenes in the extended edition made me feel like I was watching it all over again for the first time. My theory though on the box office success of these films now in modern times is that they would obviously still be dominant compared to the competition, but the profit margin wouldn't be 960%. First off, I know the numbers would be higher now due to inflation compared to ticket prices back then in the early 2000s. But nowadays, people don't go to the movies as often just because of how the market is now. Streaming services have pretty much taken over. And because they're so cheap, people don't tolerate the crowded movie theater experience as much as they used to. Also, the Lord of the Rings movies wouldn't be in theaters as long nowadays as they were back then. They'd definitely be in theaters longer than any other competing movie, but people nowadays expect movies to come to a streaming service or Blu-ray within 6 months or so after a theatrical release. Not to mention, a big part of the longevity and box office numbers the movies had in the theaters originally was because of how often people would rewatch them over and over. Just like how the original Star Wars movies would stay in theaters for years until the next one came out. The expectation of the movies being on a streaming service would impact their Blu-ray sales too. But this doesn't mean the license would lose money because of this, and I'm sure they'd have a pretty big price tag for whichever streaming company wanted exclusivity to show them. Just like how the Marvel movies were a big selling point for Netflix before Disney Plus came around. Once I became a fan of Lord of the Rings and got hooked, I really wanted to feel more a part of it however I could. So I bought the video games, toys, and even Lord of the Rings themed board games like chess and Risk. But that's just how big of a fan I was. I even wanted to be Aragorn for Halloween, and I was upset that stores didn't have realistic costumes like in the movie. The movies inspired pop culture so much for me and many others back then, and had a great influence on properties that we even see today.
It's the language of Mordor written in Elvish script. One ring to rule them all.
One ring to find them.
Oh, Jesus.
One ring to bring them all. and in the darkness, find them.
The merchandise too was always hot. The toys, games, and clothing apparel sustained good sales for a long time, and that's not always a given with a popular franchise. But fast forward to how this pop culture hype would translate today. It would be multiplied by a lot. Think of all the times you saw the popular Game of Thrones quote, "Winter is coming." I know I saw it everywhere, on t-shirts and mugs, and the whole TV show came very mainstream to a broad audience, even to people who aren't into the fantasy genre. We'd see lots of that with many popular Middle-earth quotes.
So you have chosen death.
Because of the internet social media age we're in now. And although we do have them now, there'd be tons more fan-made accounts on social media about Lord of the Rings if the movies were current. There'd be way more free advertising for it nowadays, and people would demand more content or expanded universe, likely resulting in an animated series, similar to what Star Wars did with the Clone Wars, and more video games than we've gotten to the last several years. It honestly makes me a little sad when I talk to younger people who are into all types of cartoons, superhero movies, YouTubers, Fortnite, and they haven't even seen Lord of the Rings or even felt the need to watch them. The Hobbit movies didn't quite help the mainstream appeal of the universe.
Master's mantle was there for the taking, and he threw it all away. For what?
But for many like me, it just made the first trilogy even more impressive on all fronts. It's weird to see how Lord of the Rings has been slipping into obscurity among big franchises the last several years. I sometimes thought a remastered version of the movies with better special effects being released may have helped its popularity be seen by a newer, younger audience. But the movies were so well made in the first place, and I'm sure the negative publicity being seen as a cash grab wouldn't be good. I understand the Lord of the Rings trilogy was supposed to be a one-and-done story. Tell a great book adaptation story from start to finish, and that's it. Even if the Hobbit movies were better prepared and were made into two well-paced movies rather than an unnecessary trilogy, they were just dead on arrival in terms of being compared to Peter Jackson's first trilogy. The Lord of the Rings had so many characters and high stakes and originality where it really felt like a world war was going on. Different kingdoms and races were always at odds, and not just a crazy adventure of a dozen characters, over half of which barely get any screen time or meaningful development. But the last few years I have wanted some sort of Middle-earth movie to come to the big screen, even if it's a solo story. Not only to get the bad taste of the Hobbit movies out of my mouth, but also because I began to understand the scope of the lore J.R.R. Tolkien created. And if Hollywood is going to milk a franchise over time, it might as well be one that has lots of books and literature to base its source material off of, because we all know what could happen if you run out of source material.
Best season ever!
He's bringing all the dead people back to life, and they put the women and children in a crypt with all the dead people. So, rah.
I'm relieved though that the quiet phase of the Lord of the Rings universe is slowly coming to an end, and the future Middle-earth TV show coming to Amazon is supposed to be the most expensive show ever made.
1 billion, gajillion, fifillion, million.
Which I hope translates into good writing and characters, and not just fancy sets and locations. But whatever happens with the show, which is based off of the second age preceding the movie timelines, and other future shows and movies based on a large fantasy universe, the inspiration for it all wouldn't be the same without the success of these movies. Peter Jackson said many times that the Lord of the Rings project could have been a disaster from the beginning.
They've taken a gamble that I think will probably go down in history as one of the all-time Hollywood gambles.
And I'm thankful that its recognition in the movie award scene helped deplete some biases and stereotypes about fantasy movies. And the trilogy made mainstream audiences take a hard look at the genre
with the respect that it deserves. It could one day be gone forever.
And it could have been gone for a long time if this great trilogy didn't pave the way for others to follow.